Okay, this is the third and final video in this series, putting the final touches on our first linear painting. At the end of part one, we saw that we had the basic colors put in. Uh, we blocked them in, we laid them in. They're not detailed, and we left this just as is, kind of grayish and kind of dull because we were going to glaze it in part two. Another thing you're going to notice in these slides is that these were photographed in different lights. So the color of the cloth is going to change, and I'll talk about that as we go along. Okay, so the next step after part one was part two, and in that video we talked about glazing, which is putting transparent layers of purple on top of this. So here's a version of that, and you can see what the glaze has done is it's really brightened up the colors that are there. So it's taking the color underneath, and you can see that between this and when I glazed it, I actually added lighter colors and made the whole thing a bit lighter, which I talk about in the video. So it's not just a jump from this to the next slide. But after lightening things and letting them dry and then putting some details in and then adding the glaze, this is what we ended up with. Now you can see that this glaze, it kind of pulls all the shapes together, makes it look like it's one unit, even though there's all these different colors happening in there, blues and oranges and purples and whites. The other thing it does is it gives it that kind of glowing sense of light. Now the color is different. See, this is a little more on the blue side, this is a little bit more on the red side. And so what happens with glazing is you tend to glaze multiple layers just to try and get the color exactly right. So if we go to the next slide, you can see here I've added ultramarine blue with a little bit of alizarin. So it's a much bluer. This is the original, and I'm putting on a transparent glaze that's leaning much more towards blue. That's going to take me closer to this. Okay, and here you can see this shift. Look how the cloth has changed dramatically. All right, and that's because of the lighting. So whenever you photograph your work or look at your work in different lighting, this is late afternoon sun, so it seems more blue, whereas these earlier pictures were done, I think, in the morning or even with less light in the room. So just ignore these changes of color. What you see on a photograph or in a screen, on a monitor, or a presentation like this is almost never true to color unless you're pretty sophisticated with something called color profiling. Okay, so in the next slide, you can see what I've added is details here, right? Finished this, just smeared it on. It's now looking closer to this, but I'm not done with the bottle. Added some shadows, and these are also done with glazes, okay? Because there's a little hint of red in there, I'm going to start with a reddish purple glaze and then darken it eventually. There's a hint of purple in there, so I put a purple down. And as you add glazes, you always go darker. So I can start with a brighter color initially, because when I layer things on, it's going to go darker and duller. The other thing I've done is I've added white here, and that's to represent these lights. What I'm going to do is glaze these also. And there's a very subtle one up here. So if I was to just leave this dark, I'll go back to the other. I did it there. I don't have it even there. So you can see I have them from the early stages, but what I've done here is I've developed them a little bit more with white. All right, so that when I glaze them, you'll see what happens in a second. Then I started working on the pepper. So the pepper was just basically put in there, underpainting, not much detail. And here it's getting more development, picking up the reddish orange. And then the brown, this is a reddish brown in here. And the brown is best made from complementary colors. So because I'm using orange, and because the painting has blue, it makes sense that I'm using orange and blue to make my brown. Another way could be red and green. But I used orange and blue and then added a little bit of red to make the orange more red so that I could get a slightly richer brown. And you'll see that pop out in the next couple slides. So there we go. This is a brown. More details, looking at reflected light underneath the pepper. Okay, getting details on top, getting the light and dark of the stem and then the bend over at the top. Here I lightened up the base. I really didn't need to, but in real life this picture is a little darker down here than it appeared in the slide, so it doesn't look like it's something I should have done, but I needed to do it, so I lightened up the base a little bit, and I'm going to change it again one more time. You'll find yourself working over and over and over, and every time you do it, it's a lot easier because the color underneath is there, so you don't need to cover it 100%. And paint on top of paint applies itself a little smoother. So don't be afraid to repaint things. It's sometimes quicker to repaint something than it is to try and just fix something. All right. Now here, I want to get back to the glazing. So you go back to where I was. I've lost a lot of the detail. Yeah, when you glaze, it goes darker. So a lot of the things on the side I missed. I also wanted this to maybe pop out a little bit more, and I missed some reflections here. So what I'm going to do is glaze it again. So what I did was I came back in and I painted those details in, and notice how light the details are. They're close to white. We've even got light green on the outside. And I lightened this area too. And white's fine because when I put the purple on top, it's no longer white. It becomes a really light purple. Okay? So in the next and final slide, you can see all those details are there. There's the glaze. And if I compare the two, I can see that this would benefit, especially in the middle region here, from one more layer of glaze. Okay, so I probably will go and do that, but I wanted to get this video out this week. So you can see I could put another layer in there just to make it richer. You can see I've glazed on top of these lights now, right here and right here. Put the shadows in the background. Darkened the dark parts of the pepper. If I go back and show you the pepper, they're there, but these are much darker, right? So I've gone, and I probably went a little bit too dark. That's okay. Like I've said multiple times, I'd always, given the choice, exaggerate, over-exaggerate rather than under-exaggerate, okay? In a painting, it just gives it a little bit more depth, a little bit more punch. So there are a few things I could do. I could make some of my shadows more gray, another glaze, but like I said, want to get this out so we can look at it this week.